Living my bucolic life, free of big city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Hello, welcome back to another video, and this time we're going to be making a top. It's going to be a simplicity pattern because they were on sale, so happy about that. And it's going to be this one right here, okay, the one with the longer sleeves, this version. It looks like there are sleeveless, shorter sleeve, like a 3/4 length, and then a long sleeve. The different thing about this pattern is the sleeves. They are very full. It looks like they have like a drop shoulder and then very gathered right there. So I'm happy about that because, you know, I love big sleeves. And I got some of the holiday cotton print at Joann's over the weekend. And it is this, it's 100% cotton. I have pre-washed it and pre-dried it. It's just, you know, like forest green with some silver-ish pine cones. You know, I think that that will be nice. So that's going to be it. Full disclaimer of everything, we just got done with Thanksgiving weekend, and the last couple of videos you saw I had big beautiful nails, and I could not make bread. I could not do so many things with my big beautiful nails, so I just chopped them all off, and now I am dealing with the repercussions of that, so please don't judge me on my fingernails. I just stuck sticky color on there just to make the video. So all of that aside, I'm going to go ahead and cut out my pattern and see what I find out. So the first thing I see that I didn't notice before is that there's actually a few different options. There is a rounded collar, more like a Peter Pan kind of collar, and then there's one with points. I've done a whole bunch of pointy ones. I think I'm going to go with the rounder one, kind of like on the picture here. Also, there is a more fitted option with darts and everything, or blousey. I'm going to go for the darts. I think that that will be nice. It doesn't look like the darts are going to make it super fitted because you can still see it's not like hourglassy here, but I think it'll keep it from being too blousey in the front. So that's what I'm going to do. This collar, these darts, and the longer sleeves, maybe. I might end up doing the 3/4 length sleeves just because that's a little more convenient when you're doing stuff. So looks like view A is the closest to what I'm going to be doing. And opening it up, it looks like that we have two different length options. It looks like for most of these, the versions I'm going for, it's a longer length. For the little short sleeveless one, they suggest a shorter length. I am, of course, going for the longer length because that, I think, will be more flattering to my body shape. So these are all of the pieces. Not very much, which is a good thing. So I'll have one collar, a front and a back, a huge sleeve piece. This is the collar band. That's just an elastic guide. This 7 here is the buttonhole guide, so that's not even a real piece. That's just a place marker. And 9, yeah, so just a couple pieces. So that's good. This is going to be hopefully a relatively fast pattern. All right, I got everything roughly cut out, and I've had over the several videos a few requests on how to read a pattern envelope. So I thought since this isn't a too intense video, I might as well do that right now. So the first thing when I'm looking at a pattern envelope is I look at the front because they usually give you all the front views and a photo. Sometimes it's only illustrations, but you do the best you can, and it's going to give you an idea of how things hopefully are going to position themselves on the body, and you can decide if it's right for you or not. This and a lot of the patterns now are in size ranges where there are multiple sizes per pattern. And like I am doing size 16, okay? So it's at the very top end. So if you are trying to decide if you should go on the top end or the bottom end, because like say the next pattern, a lot of times they end in 14, the next one starts in 16 for the big pattern grouping. So for that, for choosing the size, usually I choose the one that is going to have the most fitting issues. I choose it based on that size. So in general, it's the shoulders and the bust that I want to make sure I have everything right on, but because this has a drop shoulder, not real fitted, you know, the bust looks like it has a lot of ease, and I'll show you all that. So my go-to size is a 16. If I'm doing a knit pattern, sometimes I size down. If I'm doing a highly fitted pattern, I will do the higher size. You know, you have to kind of figure out your body size. And by doing that, what I mean is become really familiar with these 3 measurements. And this is on the sleeve piece. They have this usually somewhere in the pattern pieces. They're going to have this multi-size pattern option thing, and they actually give you a pretty good little synopsis of where these measurements are supposed to line up on their pattern. So like for me, usually I have more space in here. I have a high waist, so my hip to waist ratio is more spread out, but my bust is lower because, you know, gravity and things. And so I'll have these same measurements, but they might not line up exactly where they are here. And that's why sometimes I have to split patterns and lower things and everything. But if you see, what they're showing you here is that if your bust is big, but your waist is small and your hips are big, which is kind of what I do, you can, you know, start out here with a higher one, come in and then go out. And if you think you're going to need to do something like that, try to get the bigger size pattern so that you have the room to make those adjustments. These are the fabrics that they used when they were making their test garments, okay? So if you've been watching me, you know that I don't always stick with what they suggest. But my fabric over there, it's a cotton. It's not cotton lawn. Cotton lawn is a lot more lightweight. Cotton blends, you know, whatever. You get the idea. This is where you would find out if you need a knit or not, or things like that, or the weight of the fabric. They'll tell you if you need a heavy weight or a lighter weight or something. So choose your fabrics based on here. For the notions, they have the view, so I'm going to do closer to view A. So they recommend 7 half-inch buttons. All right. I would say you can go up or down about 1/8 of an inch, but not much more than that. So I would say if you're picking buttons, pick the least I would go is 3/8 of an inch in size, and the most I would go is 5/8 of an inch in size, because usually it won't fit their placket or whatever if it gets too much outside their normal range. And then they'll tell you how much elastic they want you to use and the size. So here they want you to use 3/4 of a yard of 3/8 inch wide elastic. So then it's the sizing, and they do everything in metric and, you know, meters and yards. They do everything in European sizes and American sizes, I guess, or it's American pattern sizes, because, you know, American ready-made sizes are totally different. So for me, if I'm doing size 16, they will give you the body measurements that they're basing this size on, okay? Which their body measurements they're basing it on is a 38-inch bust, 30-inch waist, 40-inch hip, with the length from the back of the neck to the waist, okay? Where am I? Down here, 16 3/4. So you can kind of get an idea from here what the sizing is going to be on the pattern. And that's why before you go into the store, if you can get these measurements of you or whoever you're sewing for, it'll be a lot better for you. And then, of course, the list interfacing, and interfacing is just about always 20-inch wide. So And on this one, they are suggesting a lightweight fusible interfacing, which I have. And then the other thing is, you know, how many yards. So say for the top A that it looks like I'm going to do most of mine on, my fabric is 45 inches wide. They also have an option for 60-inch wide fabric. And that means I would need 2 3/8 inch yards going from my size down to my width of fabric over. If I was going to get a 60-inch wide fabric, I just need slightly less. And this part down here is actually what I think is the most useful for me when I'm judging how I'm going to be altering a pattern. So say for size 16, I come all the way down here, and remember, this is for a 38-inch bust, but the finished size of the bust on the blouse is 45.5 inch, okay? You can look down and say, okay, the finished bust on a size 14 is 43. So depending on how tight you want it, you can adjust the size that you're cutting out. I want mine to be fairly loose, so I'm going to stick with my size 16. Then they have the finished back length from the base of the neck. And so these are going to give you, remember, one pattern is shorter than the other, those finished lengths. So you can see, you know, if you have a very short torso, the shorter pattern length might end up fitting you just like the longer one would on someone with a longer torso. So you have those measurements there. And this is all just duplicate information, just in metric. And then on the back of the pattern envelope, they usually have line drawings of the backs of the garments. So it's a lot of information there, and it's very useful information. So I hope that was helpful. I'm going to go ahead and cut these out. I will be right back. I wanted to point out, when you're cutting, make sure that you keep an eye on the layout, because the sleeve pieces are too wide to be able to cut with a 45-inch fabric on the fold. You need to cut them out one and then flip the pattern over and cut out the other one with the fabric, you know, outright and flat. If you have a 60-inch wide fabric, it should work. But for a 45, you need to stagger them. And this, what they want you to do, you know, I guess it depends on the size and everything. But if you cut out your front bodice pieces that way, make sure that you have one face up and one face down. That way you end up with two different ones. If your fabric is like mine, where there is an obvious right side and an obvious wrong side. Okay? So I decided to go with the 3/4 length instead of the long length, because when I was looking at this piece, the long length is very long, especially when you get the idea that this doesn't start, excuse me, that doesn't start at your top of your shoulder. It looks like on the pictures that this top part here is going to start actually a few inches down from your shoulder. That's going to make an excessively long sleeve, I think, for the long length. So I think 3/4 is good enough for me, and that is what I cut out. Okay, so I'm going to get started with my piece number 1, my front piece. Things to mark, as always, and like usual for my dots, I am going to use my hole puncher. It is a leather hole puncher. There's a link, an Amazon link in the description if you're curious. But what I do is I put a piece of leather underneath the tissue paper on top of the fabric, because I do not want to cut through my fabric on there, and the leather is going to be that barrier to stop it. So I just push it through, and that cuts a hole only in the tissue paper. And then I'm going to come back, and on this fabric, since it's darker, I'm going to use my white heat erasable pen that I just threw across there, and I can draw it. Now the whites don't work as well as the other ones. Sometimes it looks like they're not going to show up at all, and then they magically appear. It's a weird thing. If you don't like your white, I can use a white chalk pencil. So I'll see how it goes. But I am doing the version that's more fitted, and there is a dart here in the middle. So I need to make sure that I punch out and mark these darts also according to my size. So there is a top mark 2 center marks. So I can follow this line down. No, it's this one here. So I have those 2 center ones and a bottom one in my size. And then over here on this side, there is a dot also, which is right here at basically at a 5/8 inch seam allowance on both sides. I'm going to go ahead and mark it, but that's probably just marking where the gathers and the sleeves are going to be. So that's how I mark all my dots. And then for my notches, none here. There's one on the shoulder, one on the sleeve, one on the side. And I'm just going to come in with my scissors and clip, you know, about a fat 1/8 of an inch in where those notches are. Here and here. So let me get all of those dots marked, and then I will show you how I'm going to take it from there. So I decided I'm going to mark my circles with my red pen because the white just was not working well. So I am marking all of my darts and everything on the wrong side of my fabric on both sides. The right side on mine is printed, the wrong side is blank. I want to make sure all of these are on the wrong side. So now I'm also going to draw the lines for my darts. It's going to make it easier for me to see and track with my sewing machine. So just following the top dot to the middle and then back down to the bottom. Drawing this great big diamond shape right in the middle here. And I'm not sure if you can see it. See my red ink on my green here? I may have to try a different color. But I can see I have these lines drawn. I'll get a black pen out for the other side. Maybe that will show up a little bit better. All right, so I retraced it with a black line. I think we can see that diamond shape a little bit better. But what I want to show you is on the very front edge where the buttons and buttonholes are going to go, it's just fold lines, okay? And because of what we're going to be doing with these lines, I want these marks to be on the right side of my fabric. So I'm just going to line up the edge of my ruler here with the edge of my fabric, and I can see on my clear ruler that where to put it, so that 1 inch is right there. And draw the first line. Don't know why that's not visible. We're going to go with chalk. Maybe chalk will show up. It's always a game to try to figure out which marking tool to use with which fabric. Well, that's a little bit better. We can see that. So I'm going to draw a line at 1 inch all the way across, and then move my ruler up so that my chalk line is at 1 1/8, and draw another line across. So I'll have those 2 lines drawn all the way over on both of my front pieces. All right, so I've got my front piece all marked up here, my fold lines on the right side, my dart on the wrong side. And what the instructions are going to want you to do first is run a row of stay stitching along the neck edge. And they want you to do it at 1/4 inch because, you know, usually I trim down my band pieces, but this pattern already has small seam allowances at the band, so that's good. But instead of running stay stitching here, I'm going to be fusing stay tape on the inside of the neck edge of both my front pieces and my back neck piece. Okay, and part of that is because when you're sewing the band on, this step here, when you're sewing that band on and you just have a small seam allowance, it's really easy to go off course just a little bit, and so all of those stay stitches are visible. So if I fuse this on the inside, nothing is visible. And this is a stay tape. In my description, I have the seller name I bought it from on Etsy. I can't get a link in my description for some reason, don't know why, but anyway. This is a stay tape that is cut on a bias, so it curves easily. And even though it's cut on a bias, it works as a stay tape, meaning it's going to keep it from stretching out of shape because there is a very small twill tape type thing that is sewn on this tape. Okay, so when I use this, knowing that my seam allowance is going to be 3/8, and that is about the width of this whole tape, I'm going to be placing it so that the edge of my bias edge is right along the edge of the fabric, and just fuse this down really well with my iron, and that's going to hold it. So again, before I start doing this or anything like that on both my front pieces, I'm going to do this when I start working on my back piece. I'll tell you, but I'm going to be using the same stay tape in the same placement method as this. Okay, so that's what it looks like fused on. Okay, and so you can see that the stitching part is out here on the side, the flexi part is in the middle. So now what I'm going to do is go ahead and fold my dart. Now this is a long two-sided dart, and we're going to do it the technically correct way, which is sewing it in 2 different steps. The instructions point this out, and it takes a little bit longer, but it helps to ensure that you have a nice flat dart. So what I do is I put my little straight pin down one side of one dot here in the center, come back up on the other side, and then up at the top where my top dot is, I'm going to pinch that so that I have a nice straight little fold there. Put a pin up here at that top dot to hold it. Tuck in this middle one here so it is completely flat. And then come down here at the bottom where this bottom dot is. Fold that. Put a pin at that bottom dot. Okay, and that should be good enough. If you feel like you need to put one midway, kind of like this, go for it. No shame in that. And now I'm going to go ahead and go to the sewing machine. So the way that I'm going to do this is to make sure that if, like, with a dart this long, the danger is that if while you're sewing, one gets slightly off by the time you get to the bottom edge of the dart, there's a chance it could be a little off center and you could end up with a bubble. My fabric is such a sturdy woven fabric, that's not going to be an issue. But I'm going to do the method that in case you're doing more of a silky fabric or more of a fabric that does not want to behave, this is the best way to make sure that it's going to lay nice and flat. So I'm going to start in the center and go up, then come back, flip the whole thing over, start in the center and go this way. All right, not back stitching at the ends, just letting the tails hang out at the ends. I'm going to do that for both sides. Okay, so here's my big full dart. My midpoint is right here. Okay, so I am going to move that in and put it under my presser foot. And hang on. Go ahead and do a couple stitches, making sure I'm on track. Follow my line that I drew all the way to the end. And the end piece is right here. And I'm just going to go off the edge, 2 stitches off the edge, and then pull it out. Okay, going to leave a nice long tail. Right, like that. So I have a nice long tail hanging off. Okay, then, and this is why I draw my lines on both sides, flip it over this way, pull these lines out, these threads out here. I'm going to overlap by a few stitches my previous ones, just instead of back stitching and just overlapping them work. Make sure they're in line, and then follow this line all the way out to the dot I drew, run off the edge and do a couple stitches off the edge just to make sure, and pull it out and leave a nice long tail. Then at the end of my dart, I'm just going to make a big loopy knot like this, stick a straight pin through the loop, and put it at the edge of my dart like that, so that when I pull it, it's going to put the knot right there at the very edge. Cinch it up a bit and clip it so my threads are about 1/2 inch away from that knot. I like to leave just a little bit there, and it's good. If you're afraid that this is going to come loose, after you do one before you clip it, you can do another, you know, that'll work for you. These down here, since I overlapped each other, I'm just going to clip them. These are the ones in the middle, that's okay. And these up here at the top of the dart, doing the same thing. So like if you wanted to do 2 knots, I would do 1, put my straight pin through there, pull it in, tighten it up, and then do another. Now, the thing is, if you're going to do 2, it's better if you do it the opposite direction. So usually I come in this way, with it going from front to back. It would be stronger if I did it the other way the second time and had it come in back to front. It's more of kind of like a square knot. But, you know, usually 1 is plenty. So there you go. So now I have my dart sewn in actually the accurate way. So now this one is ready to press. I'll do that next. Okay, so here is my seam right here, and I have pressed it towards the center front, all right? So it's pressed that way, all is good. Now I am going to be serging the shoulder, the side seam, and the hem seam, okay? The hem part here. And I wanted to show you what I mean when I'm saying I serge all the way around all my pieces, because I don't actually cut off a lot of fabric, or at least I try not to. So I'm just cutting just hardly any off, okay? When I get to the corner, I'm going to run it until my needle is all the way to the edge of the fabric. Okay, so there's my needle at the edge of the fabric. I lift my needle up, lift my presser foot up, turn the entire thing, put it back down, and keep going up the front. Actually, am I on the side seam? Yes. So I'm going up the side right now. And that way, what's going to happen is I'm not cutting enough off that my notches are going to disappear. I'm not cutting enough off that it's going to change the shape of the piece or the size of the piece. But I'm making nice, sharp corners that way. And it's going to be able to press the side seams open and things like that. Okay, so over here at my ironing board, I'm going to start pressing it. So at that first 1 inch line, I'm going to be folding it on that line and making sure that it's fairly straight there. Coming back, putting a little crease. Okay, so it's turned under 1 inch now, and then I'm going to do it one more time on that second line, which was, hang on, let me clip this little line on. Okay, and that we're going to turn it and press it at that second line, which was 1 1/8 inch from the first one. And press it all the way up. Okay, so now the whole front edge is fold under twice. I'm going to put a few pins here because I'm going to be needing to come back and do an edge stitch along that edge, but I don't want it to move. So these pins will hold it in place while I fold to the other side. So I will end up with both of my front pieces looking like this. Okay, so I am not stitching this by machine. I'm going to be doing it by hand because it looks like the basting stitches that I'm going to be putting in, they're going to want me to pull out later on. So I got a needle and thread with a thread that is pink. That'll show up enough that I can pull it out. And I'm drawing a line on the inside 5 inches from the bottom. okay, because that is the length that I'm going to go to. So what I'm going to be doing is just basting it. Actually, I need to baste across the top here. Just my basting stitches are about 3/8 of an inch wide. They are pretty big, but that works for me. So I am basting across the very top here to hold that down, and then I'm going to run them down the side of my little folded band at, you know, somewhere between 1/16 and 1/8 of an inch in along this side. So, you know, this will not take very long, so I can just start running them down. When I get to the bottom, I'll just do a back stitch at that mark that I put at the 5-inch mark, and I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. I need to leave the bottom of these open because when it comes time to do the hem, it's just going to be a lot cleaner if that bottom part is open. And then after I have the bottom hemmed, then I can come back and top stitch it with machine all the way down at that point. But the basting is going to hold it in place so I can pull my pins out and make everything a lot nicer in the meantime. Okay, so I have set my front pieces aside, and it's time to start working on my back piece. Now my back piece was cut on a fold, you know, so it's one big piece. But other than that, it's very similar to the front. So there is a big diamond-shaped dart here. I'm going to be marking it and sewing it exactly the same as the front. Okay, same up here at the neckline. I'm going to be putting on my stay tape, the same stay tape up here at that neckline, exactly the same as the fronts. I will be clipping my notches, marking my dots exactly the same as the front. So I don't need to show you all of those things. I'm just going to do it. And the next time you see this piece, I will have this center dart marked and sewed and pressed towards the center back, okay? And I will have serged all the way around it from this shoulder down, 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 across the bottom and back up to the top of the shoulder on the opposite side. So let me go ahead and get all of that marked and done, and I'll be right back. So this is what my back looks like. This is of course the wrong side, but here you can see my darts. The darts, I did the same way where I sew from the centers out, and I have pressed them towards the center back, okay? Serging around from this point all around to the opposite side right here, and putting my fusible stay tape on the wrong side. So now it is time to go ahead and sew the fronts to the backs at the shoulder placement. So I've got a little notch right here to match up, and my edges to match up here. I'm going to stitch it straight across, add a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and then after that press this seam allowance open on both of the shoulder pieces. Alright, so now it is time to get started with my collar band and my collar. And remember, there's a couple different options for collars. There's one with pointy corners and one with rounded, and I am going with the rounded. It's the same process no matter which one. And for interfacing, I am using my come on, focus. My very lightweight fusible interfacing. So I'm going to cut one of each of these and fuse them on to one of each of these. Okay, so I have fused a piece of my interfacing to one of my band pieces and one of my collar pieces, okay? The other one is still regular on the back. Since I used an extremely lightweight interfacing, my interfacing is the exact same size as my band. If you're using an interfacing that's a lot thicker, you might want to trim out the seam allowance area just because it'll make it easier for the next steps. All right, so the way that they are putting their collar onto their band onto the garment is very different than the way I usually do. But I might try it. And the only reason I say I might try it is because since they did use a smaller seam allowance, I think that I can work with this. And sometimes when I'm doing patterns, even though it's not the way that I would normally do it, I like to follow along just to see what they're thinking, you know, just to see how pattern instructions are being put together. Because the instructions for doing something one year, it changes from year to year. So I am going to go along with it. Now on your band, actually they're going to have you do half of the band first and then the collar. So let me get my band here. I'm going to need to transfer all my markings. But before I do that, what I wanted to point out is the way that you can tell the seam allowance, even if you didn't have it in the instructions, is by these circles. Okay, this one is just a button placement. But this up here, when measuring from the center of that circle to the outside edge, is 3/8 of an inch. And the same here, and also from that circle to the bottom. So we're dealing with a smaller seam allowance, which is good, So before I actually attach this to my top, what I need to do is go back and transfer all these markings. The notches, I will be making a line at the center back because that is helpful. All of these notches, I am not going to be serging around these pieces since they are going to be completely enclosed, and the fabric I'm using will not unravel easily, so I don't need to worry about that for right now. But I make sure these circles are transferred. Those are marking shoulder seam placement. These circles are very important because those are matching collar edge placement, and these are important because those are matching band edge placement. So let me go ahead, get this, all of my little circles punched and marked clearly, all my notches clipped, and I will be right back. All right, so I really want to try to follow along with their instructions, but one of the first things they want you to do is put clips in here. And since I have my stay tape with that woven band, I'm going to clip up to that little stitched on woven band. But I have my notches marked with clips, so I'm going to go ahead and chalk over where my notches are, because once I start putting other clips in there, it's all going to blend. So those two are my center back notches. So I've got that, and I'm going to come up here and put clips, maybe a fat 1/8 of an inch through here. If you can see where my little tape is there, I'm not going up to it, okay? I'm just right at the edge of that little woven part. So it should still do everything it's supposed to do, which is to keep this from stretching out of shape, okay? And I'm just gonna put a couple little clips in this front area here. Same thing, just like a fat 1/8 of an inch, just so I can open it out nice and flat here. Okay, so now that I have this clip so it will open up nice and flat, I'm going to get the back, this piece number 3, what are they calling it? The neck band, okay? And with the wider part, the bottom of the smile, if you will, going to take my 2 center notches and mark those up with these down here and pin those on. Oops. Wrong notch. I'm glad I chalked it because I almost put it with the wrong notch. All right, so I got those 2 marked. Then I'm going to come over here on my band where it has that little dot, which is supposed to match up with my shoulder seam, which I have pressed open. I want to make sure it stays pressed open. And line up that dot so it's placed on the shoulder seam. Way to check it is if you stick a pin straight down through that dot. Is it on the seam? Yes, it is right there. So I can tuck that in. And then I'm skipping over to the very edge. Remember, I have this basted here. And on my band, there's a dot here, okay? I want the edge of this fabric to line up with that dot. And that dot is a seam allowance N, but my fabric's on the other side. So if I stick a pin through that and I look on this side, I can see where I want my fabric to line up to, okay? Right about here, like that. So I can stick a pin straight down through there. And then everything else in between should just, you know, curve out where I've clipped it, line up, and go nice and flat. So let me go ahead and pin the other side of this just the same. Be right back. Okay, so I've got it pinned all the way across. I'm going to go to my sewing machine with it this way so that my band is on the bottom, my bodice pieces are on top, and stitch it at a 3/8 inch seam allowance from here all the way down. And I'm doing it that way because if there's going to be any wrinkles or puckers, it's going to be this side acting up. So if I'm looking at it this way, I can catch it as I go. All right, so I got it sewed on. I wanted to mention a couple things. First, if when you're sewing it on, it seems like your bodice piece, even though you have all this stuff, it's a little bit bigger than this. Instead of getting a pucker up here, you can kind of see what I'd suggest is that you lower the inside piece by about 1/16 of an inch. And because you lower it, it gives it a bigger area to cover, and it's going to take out that extra, you know, that you would have in here or something like that. So that's just what I did. So you can see around the edge, sometimes my bodice piece is slightly lower on the edge than the other. Just ignore that interfacing. But I got it all done. After that, what you need to do is press the seam allowance towards the band. So what I did is just place it flat like this on my ironing board. Make sure that the seam allowance is sticking towards the middle, and then just came and ironed around this way because I didn't want to press this part completely flat yet, but I wanted to make sure I got my band wanting to move up here towards, or getting my seam allowance wanting to move up towards the top of my band. So that is pressed, and now I'm ready to go to the next step, which is on our next instruction sheet here. And what they want you to do is sew around your collar piece, and since I am doing a curved one, it's just going to be one straight stitch, and then I'll come back and understitch it so I get a nice edge. So the very first thing I need to do is get my collar piece and transfer all my markings, which of course means punching out circles, clipping notches, marking my center back line, and then we'll just pin these two pieces together, and I'm going to be sewing it. And again, you can tell by the distance of this circle to the edge that they do want you to use a small seam allowance going around. So I'll be using a good 3/8 inch seam allowance all the way around here, leaving this part open. Okay, so I've got this sewed here, got all of my little dots on, and I need to clip this outside edge so that it's going to want to curve really well. After I clip it, I'm actually, if this was a thicker fabric or a thicker interfacing, I would pink the outside edge also, but I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to, even though it doesn't say to, I'm going to run a couple little clips the rest of the way. You don't want to clip up to your stitching. Make sure you don't clip your stitching. Okay, so now I need to understitch this. And let's see which way they are going to have us do this. Looks like they are going to want the interfaced side to remain flat, which means the seam allowance is going to be pressed towards this side here. So what I need to do is understitch it the best you can. Around corners, extremely difficult. I will be working this way so that I can open it up like this and set it under my presser foot you know, get my presser foot in there this way and come down. And I'm going to be wanting to open it up so that the seam allowances are over here under the non-interfaced side. Okay, and I will be making a row of stitching on the non-interface side, about 1/16 of an inch or so in, all the way down just right along this edge, and making sure that I catch all of this stuff back here. Okay, so I've got my understitching in, okay, but the point on this whole curve where this isn't going to get to, I am going to pink it fairly close to my stitching. I would say a fat 1/8 of an inch at the top of my little pinking angles there, because that's going to make this curve a whole lot better. If I leave this full and just have a couple notches, it's going to look more like a polygon kind of thing instead of a curve. So go ahead and push this out. I'm going to go over to my ironing board and press it. I want to press it so that the understitch side curves under. All right, and I have a nice curved edge at my corner, and trying to make this fairly equal. The understitch side will probably stick out slightly farther than the non-understitch side. That is okay. That's how it's supposed to be. All right, so I have it pressed now, and you can see how one side is lower than the other. Perfectly fine. It kind of has to if this is going to curve right. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is sewing this onto my band. And I don't want my sides to come open. I don't want them to get, you know, placed ajar. What I'm going to do, I've actually already done on this side, is just get a little piece of stitch witchery, stick it in here, place it near the edge, and just fuse those two little edges together so that this will then work as a single piece along the edge. If I was to stitch this together or baste it together, there's a chance that those stitches might show because we are using a small seam allowance. So for me, stitch witchery is the easiest to do. All right, so now I need to sew my collar onto my blouse, and I'm going to be placing the side that has the understitching on it, which is going to be the bottom of the blouse, towards the blouse, so that the side that is up does not have understitching on it. Okay, and I need to match up. I've got some double notches on each side back here in my center back mark, so I'm going to be matching those up. But also on your band, there's a dot up here, and you don't want your collar to go past this dot. So I'm just stuck a pin there so I can line up the edge of my collar to where that little pin is coming through, and then place that. So I'm going to get the two ends of my collar matched up first. So let me go ahead and do that over here, and then I'll work on the back, and then I'll average out everything in between. Okay, so I've got my back, center back, those two notches pinned, and I've got this front one, and I can see that if I just pull it together, everything else matches up really perfectly, where the bottom of that collar curve matches up with the band curve. So that's really helpful. So what it's going to ask you to do is machine baste this on. And because it's lining up so nicely, I am going to, but I'm going to do it at a very small seam allowance, probably a little less than 1/4 inch, because I don't want my basting stitches to show. It's strictly to hold this together, because before I turn it, I need to sew another layer on. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, machine basting it, making sure this edge here does not go past that dot, and I'm probably going to be sewing it about halfway, okay? Okay, so I've got that basted on, you know, because the next step they're going to want us to do is put on the other side of this band. Now, what they're going to ask is that you fold up and press the bottom edge up first. I am not going to do that. I will be folding up the very edges, okay, so that when I pin it, those edges are going to be folded up, but I'm not going to do the whole bottom edge. I will do that after I flip it. So what you do is pin to match the folds on these bottom edges here. And make sure that up here it is good. Okay, so what I'm going to do is actually draw my stitching line so it's just outside of where this join is. Okay, I'm going to draw that line up there so I can see it coming around, and I'm going to draw this line here. What this line is the edge of where my collar is. Okay, let's see if I can get it to focus there. So where the edge of all of this fabric, where my collar is, that's what line I'm drawing here, because I want to make sure that I catch that correctly and that I don't get this all messed up. So I can put a couple pins there. That's going to be the trickiest part of the sew, is this little corner on each side. So then, you know, this whole way across the back is easy. I'm not going to mess with that right at this second because I want to make sure I get this side correct. So again, I'm going to fold up the bottom at about the 3/8 that the front is. Line up that bottom edge. Now, when I was sewing this on and I got to the end of the row, my bottom edge wanted to stick out a little further. So I am actually going to be making a slightly smaller seam allowance here than even the small one that they're calling for, because my fabric there is out farther. So this is where it is, which is about a fat 1/8 of an inch, but that's okay. I can still make it work. And coming around here and just easing into that. Again, the corners are the trickiest part. If you can get those corners down, going across the entire back is going to be fine. But the main thing is to make sure your stitching is just beyond where this part is here. Okay, so it'll be like about right there and going straight around and then all the way straight across the back. I will pin that, but coming straight across the back here, again, about a 3/8, but adjust your corners to whatever you need to make sure it fits. Okay, so let me go ahead and do that. Oh, I will be using a narrow foot for this just because it's easier for me to get into smaller places and have more control with a little narrow foot than the big old fat foot. So that's the only change that I'm going to be making right now. Okay, so with that stitched, I am going to make some clips around this curve, and I am going to trim the curve. Some better scissors here, trimming it down to about 1/8 of an inch around that curve, including my little clips. Actually, on this side, while I have the big scissors, I'm going to trim it first. Once you get up to where the collar is, that's fine. You don't need to go any further than that. Make my little clips near, but not to my stitching. I believe these are still here. Yes, they are. And now I'm going to just turn this right side out. So my collar should be coming out nicely. Just kind of pooch out that little band. So that's what it looks like on the outside, okay? What I have to do is obviously do this side too. Pull my collar up. I'm going to go over to my ironing board and press this band down up here. So it's going to want to lay that direction. Okay, so the way they're going to want you to sew this closed is by edge stitching it on the outside, making sure you catch everything in here, which is fine. It can be a little bit risky when you just have your edge of your fabric right there at the seam line, because sometimes it'll want to go up because they want you to do it while you're looking at the outside. Okay, two ways around this, at least for me. One, skip machine stitching it and just whip stitch it all in, which works very well. It does. Or my other favorite option is stitch witchery, you know. So first of all, this corner here, I've got a lot of layers. I'm actually gonna take my scissors and cut up into my collar there so it doesn't have quite as many layers. Okay, what I'm gonna be doing is, I'm going to do this at the ironing board, but I'm going to fold it under and press it and stick a little piece of stitch witchery in there so it's going to hold no matter what, okay? And I'm going to be laying my fabric down so it is just beyond the stitching line. So if you can see, like right here is my stitching line, I'm going to pull my fabric just below it. And from this side where I can see everything, put a little piece of stitch witchery, fuse it down, and go on to the next step. All right, so let me go ahead and get all that done straight across there. Okay, so at this point, I have this all turned under, little pieces of stitch witchery in there holding it. Yeah, when I was pressing it, I've got some wrinkles here, but once it's stitched, I can come back and iron those wrinkles out. That's not a big deal to me. Getting the stitch witchery fused was more important than avoiding wrinkles, you know, and they will press out. So now that that's done, I'm going to flip it over this way, go over to my sewing machine, and I'm not going to do a stitch in the ditch. I'll do like a top stitch right about here, right about a 1/16 of an inch up from this seam line all the way across. Okay, so this is what it looks like on the right side, just that little row of stitching there. On the inside, the wrong side, my stitching is a little bit higher, but because of my stitch witchery and everything, even though like here it's slightly wider than it is here, it is catching it the entire way. So that's one of the great benefits of that. I'm going to pop this up on my dress form, fold down the collar, and call it a night for tonight. I'm going to go ahead and get started again tomorrow. See you then. Welcome to the next day. And I put my blouse on my dress form. Want to show you what it looks like at this point. And I just have these little areas here overlapped at the position that they would be. Just pin the sides, add a 5/8 thereabout seam allowance. And one thing I can tell you is usually, you know, for me, I do a lower bust adjustment by about 1 inch, and I did not do that on this. I wasn't even thinking about it. But if you have to do that, you might want to just lower where that top dart comes to, because it's pointing up a little higher than I normally would like. But since I don't have a sideways one and it's kind of a blousey blouse, I'm not going to worry about it at this point. But if I ever do it again, I will be lowering where that top is, okay? So that means just, you know, drawing a little bit shorter dart line. So that's not a big deal. I can see how far the shoulders of the blouse are going to be compared to my actual shoulders, and we've got probably about 4 inches here. So it's a hefty drop shoulder, but it's coming along pretty good. So next thing I'm going to do is get started working on the sleeves. All right, so this is my big sleeve pattern, and I did cut the 3/4 length ones. And what I wanted to show you is that, you know, knowing, like I just showed, that my shoulder is dropped by, you know, a good that much, whatever that is. If I add my sleeve, you know, take out seam allowance, take out casing, my sleeve at the 3/4 inch or 3/4 length one is 16 inches plus 4 inches. That is a long sleeve on me. So, you know, proportional, do your math. I think that if I did the long sleeve one, I'd have a lot of blousiness right here that I'd end up just pushing up anyway. So not going to do that. So I have 2 of these cut out. If you're doing a fabric that's only one dimension or one-sided, make sure they're 2 opposite sides, okay? And what I need to do is clip these 2 notches on the top and my center point. So I'm going to have 3 little clips there, and I'm going to serge around the entire piece of both of my sleeves before I do anything. After that, what I need to do is run 2 rows of gathering stitches between these two notches. So from here all the way to there, 2 of them. I'll be doing 1 row at about a 1/2 inch seam allowance and 1 row at about a 3/8 inch seam allowance, just so I have 2 nice steady ones, because this is a very wide sleeve. So let me go ahead, do all of those things, you know, clip notches, serge the edge, run gathering stitches, and I will be right back. And also, before I forget, because these 2 sides look very, very similar, before I pull my pattern totally away, I know that the back side is the one with a double notch, okay? And so I am going to go ahead and on this back corner, as I do, write a letter B with my heat erasable pen, excuse me, so that I know that these are my backs and I'm not going to lose those. And my pen blends with this dark fabric, so I'm just going to underline them with chalk. So now I have a B underlined. I should be able to keep track of that. Okay, so here's my sleeve. Got my gathering stitches in. I put a mark where my center notch is so that you can see it better. And my gathering stitches start where this notch is in the back and go to where the notch is in the front. Come on. Focus, and go to where the notch is in the front right here. That's where it ends. And so what I'm going to do is just loosely pin it on, matching my center mark here with my shoulder seam and the back side. Most of my mark came off, but I can still see that chalk mark, plus I can see the double notch, so I know this is my back side of this sleeve. I'm going to pin it from the edge up to this notch and the front. I'm going to do the same thing, pin the edge up to this notch, and then just get started pulling my bobbin threads of my gathering stitches and easing them in so that it's fairly uniform between the notches and the centers. Okay, so I've got it all pinned on here. I have not sewed it yet. I'm going to be sewing it at 5/8 of an inch straight across here. And I just want to point out the gathers are not that tight. Here we go. See, we can see that. They're not really, really bunchy. It's nice, gentle gather. So that's good. It looked like it was going to be tighter than that on the picture. So good to know. So after I sew it at 5/8 of an inch, I'm going to press that seam allowance up towards the bodice so that the seam allowance will be up and the sleeve will be down. I'm going to do that for both sides. All right, so here it is. That's the extent of the gathering on the sleeve. So what I need to do now is fold it right sides together, match up my underarm seam right here, stick a pin in there, and down here at the end of my sleeve, and down here at the end of the hem of my blouse. So I'm going to sew it at 5/8 of an inch up here, make that curve, come down here at 5/8, and then press this seam allowance open. Alright, so I've got it sewed up. I am going to press it open, but before I do that, I need to make some clips here at this underarm seam, just so that it will flex easier. So I've got my little seam roll here that we made last spring on another video, of course. And so I'm going to take my little sleeve roll, stick it inside the sleeve, hence the name. Pop it on here and press this one open. And I move the camera over here because while I have it on the sleeve roll, I'm going to go ahead and roll up the hem on the bottom to make my casing for my elastic. So I've got my 2 pieces of elastic, called for 3/8, mine's closer to 1/2 inch, but close enough. I cut these according to the size. I think it's pattern piece number 6. It's a elastic guide. So when I make my casing, I want to make sure that I have plenty of room for my elastic, my bodkin to pull it through, and a little tuck under. And I usually like to go a little bit bigger So like if I set my elastic here, I can say, okay, I have about 1/8 of an inch on each side. That's plenty of room to pull it through. And so if I do that, make my crease and unroll it, I can get my little ruler and see that from that little crease up to the top edge, I have about 1 1/8 inches. So what I'll do is go ahead and fold up the whole thing and press it at 1 1/8 inches here, and then come back and just tuck under my little serging seam so that then I'll have the right size little casing for what I need, okay? But while I'm over here, before I do that, as always, what I'm going to do is stick some stitch witchery underneath my seam allowances so that I don't have to deal with that when I'm pushing my elastic through. So I just get a few inches of it. It's just, you know, the little fusible web stuff. The one I use is about 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter wide. It's handy that way. Press that in. Got a crease there I'm going to press out too. So now that that is pressed, these seam allowances are not going to interfere when I'm trying to feed elastic through. They're glued down. So that's what I want. Okay, so now that I have it all pinned up, I am going to stitch my casing closed. I'm going to do it over here where the seam allowance is, leave the opening right here on top of the seam allowance. So start it here, go all the way around and end it right here. Okay, so back here at my table, got my little casing all sewed. I'm going to pop my bodkin onto my elastic. So I'm ready to go ahead and feed it through, and just going to try to be careful not to get it tangled in there, to make sure it stays nice and straight. Pull it all the way through. Before I get too far, take my little end and pin it up here to my seam allowance so that I can just continue to pull it all the way down. And when I get out the other side, I'm going to stitch them together. Okay, so I've got it all the way through. I have pinned my little ends together here. And since this elastic is so thin, I am just going to stitch it, overlap it and stitch it. There you go. So what I usually do for my elastic is I just kind of overcast one side and then the other side and put an X in the middle to hold it somewhat secure. When you get to the point where it looks kind of like that, stitches on either side and an X in the middle, then I will just tie it off on, oopsie, pulled right off my needle there. Well, that's okay. I got my knot pulled tied already. Clip it and pop it in. I'm going to need to stitch this little opening right here by hand, or I can put it on the machine. You know, you do you. I think I can actually slide that in my machine just to close up this little area right there. So I'll do that for both of my sleeves. Okay, so I've just put it back onto my dress form and pinned it closed in the front so we can get a look of what it's looking like. I think it's nice. So you can see way down here is where the sleeve gathers are, which is expected. The back is good. Now if you do a version that does not have the fitting darts here, that'll be even more blousy, but you can see there's still quite a bit of ease in here even with the darts on it. So that's all good. The only remaining thing to do is all the buttons and buttonholes and hems on the very bottom. Okay, so starting the front hem, this is one of my fronts here. I just have it open flat the whole way, but what I do on this side, we'll do on the other side also. So I have it, you know, turned in and then turned in again. What I need to do is open it up, and at this first fold, turn it all the way out like this, okay? And then, actually I'm going to put a little pin here just to hold it really quick. All right, then at 1 1/4, and directions say make sure it is exactly 1 1/4, I'm going to draw a little line straight across there Don't know if you can see that, where that yellow line is, and I need to stitch just from this edge all the way over here, following that line at 1 1/4 inches. Okay, so it is sewn here, so I'm going to trim, sticking my scissors in here, this top part to within about 1/4 inch, okay? And then I'm going to clip it in about halfway, about 1/2 inch in, and clip it straight down, okay? So it looks like this. So it looks like this. So this part is at 1/4 inch, and then the last layer comes in about 1/2 inch and then straight down. And then what I'm going to be doing is turning this right side out. Get my handy dandy chopstick. Poke that corner out. Okay, so on the outside it'll look like this, and this is what it looks like in the inside for right now. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other corner. Okay, so this is my bottom edge now. So what I'm going to do is go to my ironing board and press the whole bottom edge just like this with 1 1/4 inch. Move that over. With 1 1/4 inch hem, okay? And that should make it completely flat all the way across. Then I'm going to come back and tuck under my little serged edge like that. Press it again and run a row of stitching, of edge stitching right along that. So first step, fold it up at 1 1/4 inch and press, fold under the edge, press, and then top stitch across. Okay, I wanted to show you I have stitched, just top stitched all the way across the bottom here, looking at the wrong side. And when I get over here to where this is my front opening, what I'm doing is just taking one stitch, overlapping it, and leaving my needle down, lift my presser foot, rotate the whole thing under here. And remember, I have it basted all the way up here. I'm actually going to cut that little knot off so I can pull it if I need to. And then just run the top stitching, which for me, I am just using a regular zigzag foot so I can guide it with one of the inside little legs of my zigzag foot to get the size that I need. And I'm just going to run it straight up all the way up here. Now if you start running into your basting and it's making you nervous, I think my pin has a snag, you can always pull it out. It doesn't hurt anything to pull it out at this point. It has done what it needs to do. So I can get my little awl. It's easier for flicking out stitches. And I'll just pull out a few, sew up to that. And pull out some more, and so on and so forth, all the way up to the very top where my collar band joins on. Now at this point I'm almost up to the top where my edge of my band is, especially where that seam line is for it. That's where I want to stop sewing. So I'm going to go all the way up and back up and call that good. These are the buttons that I'm going to be using. They are very old buttons, but I do think that they match the green pretty well. But because they're old and, you know, used, they have a little bit of a worn sheen to them, but I kind of like that. I think that it's going to blend really well. So they are a little less than 5/8. These are probably 1/2 inch buttons, which should be just about right. So if this is the width of my band here, my button's going to fit right in there. I like that. So what I need to do now is transfer over the markings for all of my buttonholes. So looking straight down at it, you can tell the buttonhole is going to be on this side, the buttons are on this side. So this is the side I'm going to deal with. I will put my buttons on after my buttonholes are in place. So pattern comes with this little strip, okay? And what they want you to do is put one button right up here in the band, which is not included in this strip, okay? So I'm not going to mark that. The top of this strip thing is supposed to line up with this little edge right here. Alrighty, so now that I have it cut out correctly, if I put this right on top here, you can see that it pretty much lines up so that my edge stitches are pretty close. It looks like, yeah, I'm within 1/8 of an inch of that for my edge stitches. So I'm pretty happy with that. So what I'm going to do is just lay this down flat. Again, I'll fold my little strip in half and press it down all the way through. And by folding it in half, I can still see where those buttonholes are. Okay, so I'm going to put this very top part here at the point where the band is sewn on, and I'm just overlapping the edge where my stitching line is right here. I'm going to put a little pin there and pull it down here. So this is one way. You can always just place it wherever it fits best on your own body. That is completely fine too. I just felt like using their guide. So let me go ahead there. All right, so now what I need for my buttonholer is a starting point and a track, okay? So I'm going to be marking straight across the top line, because for each buttonhole there's 2 marks. So I'm marking straight across at that top line for my starting point. Seems like nothing marks really well on this fabric for some reason. All right, so now I have that, and knowing I'm going to start at the top and head down, then I can pull it off, and with my ruler I can see that if my band, you know, between the edge and the stitching is about 1 inch, if I put my ruler at 1/2 inch, wherever there's that starting point, that's going to give me the track that I need. So I'm just going to draw those all the way down. So I should have a letter T, or at the worst a letter L, all the way down for each one of these points, but that's going to give me a place where to start and where the track should be. They go up and down. The one up here, I'm just going to eyeball it midway. It goes long ways. Okay, so this one is going this way, these buttonholes go this way, and I'm going to give myself a little starting point at about 3/8 of an inch from the edge in, okay? And that should give it a point where when the button scoots all the way over towards the end of this buttonhole, it should line up fairly well with these. So let me go over to my buttonhole sewing machine, and I'm going to put these on. So once again, this is the machine that I use for my buttonholer, which is down here. It's this contraption. This is a Singer 15. It's got a pretty strong little motor. And I have a separate video, again, showing all about my buttonholer attachment. They are fabulous. I highly recommend, because they make a nice oval shaped buttonhole. So I have a 5/8 inch cam in here. So I'm just going to pull I'm going to do my upper button first, line up my needle with that cross point in my T. Set down the presser foot and hope for the best. I have not done a trial on this yet, so. And I'm going to go actually around this top one just a second time until I get about 1/4 inch in this way. Because that's just enough overlap where nothing will give me any trouble. And I can pull it out and clip these threads. And that is the buttonhole it makes. It's a nice little rounded edged buttonhole. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for the rest of these all the way down. Okay, so back over here at my table, I need to punch out and cut my buttonholes, just kind of knocking that chalk off. Whatever I don't get knocked off will come out in the wash, so I'm not too worried about that. So I've got my little buttonhole here, got my little chisel on my little block of wood. I'm gonna slice through once, scoot it over, slice through to the edge, open it up and run my fingernail on it to make sure there are no little threads that are going to snag my button. There's a tiny one right there. Okay, push the button through to make sure that it will go through well and move on to the next one. I'm going to go ahead and cut open all of my buttonholes. So somehow in my very, very busy pattern blouse here, let's see if I can put this ruler underneath so you can see a little bit better. Here are my buttonholes. This is the edge. And I just have it overlapping the position, like this is a 1-inch port here, and I have it overlapped so where I want the final position to be, which is basically covering the stitching line on the underneath edge, but not by much. So I'm going to get my heat erasable pen, and in the very center of all of these buttonholes, reach through and draw, I can't remember if I did that one already, draw a little circle. Nope. And that is going to give me the position where I want to put my button. Now, it's hard to see, so I'm drawing a bullseye circle around each one because yikes, they are disappearing. And I think that the reason I'm having such a hard time marking is everywhere that there's this silver stuff, it's coated with something that just does not want to let any marking anything appear. So I've got one here, here, here. It's right in the middle of a leaf. Here. Draw a circle around that and up here. And then the very last one I'm going to be doing is the one up on the collar. And that one I will put more towards the center edge of this buttonhole. I could not remember the word for buttonhole. Oh my gosh. So I'm going to put a button here on this edge of this buttonhole and then in the center of all these, and I will be sewing those on by hand. Looks like this one has disappeared. It's another one of these ones in the middle of one of these shiny leaves. Shiny leaves are giving me trouble with marking this whole time. Shiny leaves and dark colors. Anyhow, I will just be using a black quilting thread, a needle, a thread, and my old buttons, and I'm just gonna sit here, enjoy my time, listen to something pretty, and sew buttons, and I will be right back. Okay, so at this point I have all of my little buttons sewed on, and I'm going to flip it upside down and put a little dab of my clear fingernail polish just over the threads to kind of glue them tight so that I won't have to sew on any replacement buttons, because I don't think I could ever find any that match these, honestly. Alrighty, so it's all done, and you know what? I like this pattern. Fairly easy as far as a blouse pattern goes. You know, having the front be just a fold in instead of a whole separate piece is nice. No interfacing involved there. The collar went together well. I like that the collar already had the seam allowances trimmed. That's a good thing. And it's comfortable, you know, way to go for them for that. I didn't see any problems. Everything matched up well. Pardon my wind. So yeah, I like it. I think that it's a good blouse. I think that I would make it again. I don't see a problem with it. This again was 100% cotton, but I hope that you enjoyed it. I see there's sun right behind my head there, so I'll move over and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Living my bucolic life, ● city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.